In the quiet village of Malira, surrounded by thick jungle and whispered legends, lived two sisters, Amina and Zawina. Their family belonged to a long line of snake whisperers, guardians of the serpent shed, a sacred place where ancestral spirits dwelled in the form of snakes. These serpents were not merely animals, they were revered, feared, and seen as the voice of the gods. Each family generation produced one chosen who could walk into the shed and leave untouched, protected by their blood and gift. Amina, the elder sister, possessed this gift. From a young age, she would sit by the compound wall and hum lullabies that caused even the wildest snakes to slither to stillness. She never forced them, never trapped or harmed them. Instead, she listened. She watched the flick of their tongues and the shimmer of their scales and knew what each movement meant. When the village diviner first witnessed her calming a cobra merely by gazing into its eyes, he declared her the spirit's whisper. From that day she was honored, her feet washed during festivals, her words sought for omens. Zawina, 2 years younger, watched all of this unfold with growing resentment. Where Amina moved softly, she walked with pride. Where Amina bowed to the old ways, Zawina questioned them. She was not without talent. Her hands were deft, her voice sharp, and her mind even sharper, but she lacked what Amina had, the invisible thread that tied her spirit to the snakes and to the people's awe. And Zawina hated being in the shadow. Their father, Elder Baraka, was the keeper of the shed. He had once been the chosen until age took his steadiness. He taught both girls the lore, that the serpent shed held not just snakes but memory, judgment, and prophecy. Only the worthy can stand among them, he often said. They know truth. They bite lies. Amina took his words to heart. Zawina rolled her eyes when he wasn't looking. Behind their hut was the shed. It was made of thick clay walls laced with herbs, its door bound with snakeskin rope and an ancient seal. Inside were dozens of snakes, vipers, pythons, and mambas, all sacred. Once a year, the chosen would enter and clean the shed, speak with the spirits, and come out with visions. Only Amina had entered since their father's time, and each time she returned, her voice carried a weight that silenced even the noisiest market square. Zawina, watching all this, began to grow bitter. Her jealousy simmered in silence, fed by whispers in her own mind. Why her? She would mutter in the dark. What makes her better? She believed that Amina's calmness was weakness, that her humility was a trick. Zawina wanted glory, wanted to be seen, feared, remembered. One evening, the village elders declared an upcoming festival to honor the snake moon, when spirits were said to be closest to the human world. Amina was chosen to enter the shed the night before to seek guidance. Zawina volunteered to assist her to learn the old ways. Their father was hesitant but relented, believing perhaps it was time both daughters shared the burden. As twilight dipped the village in gold, Amina and Zawina stood before the serpent shed. Amina touched the seal with reverence. Zawina stared at it like a puzzle to be solved. When the door creaked open, the air grew thick with musk and ancient energy. Amina stepped in first, barefoot and slow. The snakes slithered forward, recognizing her scent. Zawina followed, her heart racing, not from fear but anticipation. The shed was silent, save for the soft hisses and the rustle of scales. Amina moved to her usual place, kneeling in the center. The snakes surrounded her but did not strike. Zawina stood stiffly behind her, eyes scanning the shadows. One viper approached her slowly and she flinched. Amina whispered, "Do not fear. They know we are here." But Zawina was not calm. She was calculating. As Amina began to hum an ancient song, calling the spirits, Zawina stepped back and reached into her sash. Hidden in her robe was a broken fang from a dead snake, a cursed item said to provoke fury in even the most peaceful spirits. She had stolen it from the diviner's hut weeks ago. With trembling fingers, she tossed it behind Amina, among the snakes. At first nothing happened. Then the air shifted. The snakes began to stir, their eyes turning toward the fang. Their bodies tensed. Amina turned sharply, sensing something wrong. "What have you done?" she whispered, but Zawina did not answer. The snakes began to hiss louder, agitated. They encircled Amina protectively, sensing the danger but unsure of its source. Zawina stepped forward, trying to appear innocent. A sharp pain sliced through her ankle. She gasped. One of the smaller snakes had bitten her. More hissed, rising, ready to strike. Amina shouted, "Stop," and they froze. Her voice, full of pain and command, rippled through the shed like thunder. Slowly, the snakes lowered their heads and retreated. Zawina collapsed to the floor, tears streaming, not from the bite but from the realization. Only one snake had bitten anyone, and it had bitten her. As Amina carried her sister out of the shed, Zuina looked up through hazy eyes. "Why did they spare you?" she asked. Amina, her voice soft but firm, said, "Because I came to listen. You came to be seen." And behind them, the snakes watched, silent and wise, as the door to the shed closed once more. The village of Mbale gathered under the full moon, their faces flickering with firelight and ancient wonder. It was the time of the serpent ritual, a sacred night when the oracle, cloaked in skins and smoke, would open her mouth and speak the words of the spirits. Amina stood beside her sister Zuina near the front, as their mother's grip on their shoulders tightened in anticipation. All around them villagers bowed low, their chests rumbling with quiet chants. The snakes, thick, coiled and glistening, slithered peacefully across the ceremonial stones, as if listening for the divine. The oracle's voice broke through the silence like a knife through water. "Among you," she hissed, her eyes rolled white, "one shall walk among serpents untouched, until bitten by blood." Gasps echoed. Then silence. Then whispers. By morning the entire village believed the prophecy was about Amina. Everyone had seen her walk by the sacred pond where the vipers nested, and none had ever risen to strike. Even as a child, Amina had caught a spitting cobra by the tail to save a neighbor's goat, and the snake had simply curled around her wrist like a bracelet. Old men remembered how the boa near the mango tree slithered away instead of lunging at her. To them, this prophecy was merely confirmation of what they had always suspected. Amina was chosen. The elders began inviting her to snake rites usually reserved for high priestesses. She was seated beside them during feasts. When she passed through the market, people bowed their heads, not out of fear but reverence. Children ran to her for stories. Elders asked her to bless water. Even the oracle herself touched Amina's cheek and said, "You are not just unbitten, you are unbreakable." Zuina watched all of this from the shadows. At first, she tried to swallow her bitterness. She told herself Amina deserved the praise. But every new praise felt like a nail in her chest. Zuina was not talentless, she was clever, beautiful and quick with herbs. Yet no one called her special. They barely saw her. Even their parents, once balanced in their affection, began favoring Amina subtly. Their mother made special meals for Amina on feast days. Their father nodded more often at Amina's words than at Zuina's. And Amina, ever kind, kept including Zuina. She invited her to rituals. She shared her dreams. She weaved bracelets for her. But that only made it worse. Pity was the worst insult of all. Zuina didn't want charity. She wanted to be seen. The final spark came during a village offering to the great serpent idol. As tradition dictated, one young woman would be chosen to leave the first bowl of milk at the serpent's altar, an honor linked to protection, prosperity, and one day leadership. The elder priest lifted his hand slowly toward the crowd. Zuina closed her eyes, already imagining her name echoing through the air. But it wasn't hers. "Amina," the priest said. Cheers rose like thunder. Amina stepped forward, her eyes wide, her mouth trembling with humility. She looked back at Zuina with a smile as if to say, "We did this together." But Zuina didn't smile back. She felt her nails dig into her palms. She felt something black and slick coil in her heart. She walked away before the milk even touched the altar. From that night, the sisters were no longer sisters in spirit. They slept in the same hut, ate the same food and even walked to the same well, but a wall thicker than stone had grown between them. Amina sensed it, tried to reach out, but Zuina remained cold. The villagers didn't notice the shift, not at first. But small signs crept in. When Zuina passed, goats grew nervous. Snakes that once lingered near the huts began disappearing into the forest. Babies cried when she approached. Old women muttered prayers more often. Zuina noticed. She knew what it meant. They were beginning to think she was cursed. One night, unable to sleep, Zuina crept to the back of the compound, where the forbidden snake shed stood. It was a place built for the sacred serpents, those too powerful to be seen in daylight. Only those anointed by prophecy could survive within. And yet, Zuina stood before its wooden doors, hands trembling with fury and determination. Her blood boiled with years of being unseen, unchosen, and unloved. Inside the snakes stirred. Their bodies shifted in coils. They smelled her rage. She whispered, "Why should she be the only one?" For a moment, silence. Then hisses. Then a low, serpentine rustle. That night, as she returned to her bed, Zuina felt something cold trail her spine, not from outside her body but from within. And somewhere far off, in the depths of the forest, a dying snake bit its own tail, and the wind carried the scent of betrayal home. The night air crackled with dry heat, the stars buried behind thick smoke curling from the east wing of the compound. Flames licked the wooden walls of the herb shed, their orange tongues casting flickering shadows across the ground. Villagers rushed with clay pots of water, coughing, shouting, slipping through the chaos. Inside the shed had been the most prized possession of the snake keepers, a bed of rare healing roots, grown with chance and sweat over seasons, used to mend venom wounds and calm cursed serpents. Now they were gone, turned to ash in the blink of a night. Amina stood there in the smoke's edge, hands blackened with soot from trying to smother the fire with her shawl. Her eyes were wide, not with fear but with a confusion so deep it bordered on betrayal. She had no idea how the fire started. She had gone to fetch water after her evening prayer, only to return and find the inferno already rising. The flames devoured everything before the others even arrived. Behind the crowd, half hidden in the shadows, stood Zawina. Her fingers trembled, but not from fear of being discovered. No one saw her slip out of the herb shed moments before the blaze began. No one saw the flicker of flame she dropped on a bed of dried serpent grass, or the way her lips curled into a smirk when it caught fire. She had timed it perfectly. And now all eyes turned not toward her, but her sister. The elders convened before dawn, summoned by the shrill bell of misfortune. They stood in a circle beneath the great baobab, cloaks rustling in the night breeze, faces stern. The village's fate was tied to those roots. Without them, there would be no way to cleanse snake bites during the peak of the festival season. The serpents could become restless, even vengeful. Amina knelt before them, head bowed. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She simply said again and again, "I don't know how it started." Zawina, her face streaked with fake tears, stood behind the crowd of villagers and whispered to one of the elders. She was closest to the herbs. She had been tending them alone all week. Maybe the spirits are testing her. The seed was planted. It didn't take long for suspicion to bloom. The elders deliberated, casting long glances at Amina. She was the unbitten, the one the oracle had spoken of. If the prophecy was true, she should be beyond harm. But if she had lied, if she had brought shame to the sacred role, then justice must fall swiftly. That's when Zawina stepped forward, her voice shaking with rehearsed sorrow. "Perhaps we must test the prophecy, elders. The shed of serpents, let it reveal the truth. If she is truly chosen, no harm will come to her." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The serpent shed was a place of fear and awe. No one entered it except for the highest snake priest during annual rituals. It was where the village's oldest and most sacred snakes dwelled, creatures with venom that could silence a soul in seconds. Some said spirits lived within them. Others believed the snakes whispered secrets at night, waiting for the unworthy to come close so they could strike. To send Amina inside alone was an act of brutality. But cloaked in tradition and prophecy, it sounded like justice. Amina lifted her head slowly and looked at Zawina, eyes meeting across the fire's ruined trail. She saw the flicker of something, triumph? Regret? But Zawina's mask didn't crack. She just looked away, biting her lip as though the decision tore her heart. The elders nodded grimly. At moonrise she shall enter. If she walks out untouched, she is innocent. If not, the spirits have spoken. That night, the compound fell into an uneasy silence. No drums. No chanting. Just the slow build of tension as the moon climbed higher. Amina was brought to the edge of the serpent shed by two masked attendants. They opened the heavy wooden door, and the hiss of 100 unseen scales slithered into the air like smoke. Amina stepped forward barefoot, wrapped in a white cloth symbolizing purity. Her face was unreadable, calm, even serene. She knew she hadn't started the fire. She didn't know who had, but she knew something in her sister's gaze had changed over the last moon cycles. The way Zawina watched her during rituals. The way her smile never reached her eyes. The attendants closed the door behind Amina. Darkness swallowed her. Inside the shed, the air was thick with musk and silence. The floor writhed beneath her feet, snakes of every shape and stripe coiled and slithered, but none lunged. Some brushed her ankles. One curled around her wrist gently, almost in greeting. Her breath slowed. She began to hum, an old lullaby her grandmother used to sing when calming restless vipers. Outside, the villagers waited in tense silence. Zawina stood among them, her fingers clenched behind her back, eyes fixed on the shed door. What she didn't know was that inside, one snake had already tasted the air and caught a scent it recognized, not Amina's but hers. The scent of the one who spilled oil, who kindled fire, who wore betrayal like perfume. And that scent had lingered, on a handkerchief, on a shawl, left in the shadows of the shed before the fire was set. Amina didn't see the fangs until they sank into her leg. She gasped, not from pain but from recognition. The snake wasn't attacking. It was delivering a message. Not one of death but one of truth. Blood welled up, not hers. The prophecy was in motion. The path to the serpent shed was silent, lined with villagers who did not dare look into Amina's eyes. They had grown afraid, not just of what she might become, but of what they had let happen. The moon hung low, dimmed behind the clouds as if it too wished to turn away. Amina's wrists were bound with woven ropes, not tight enough to hurt, but tight enough to remind her this was no ceremony, it was exile masked as tradition. Zouina stood near the door of the shed, holding the ancestral staff given to her earlier that day. Her expression was unreadable, yet her eyes flickered with something sharper than concern. As Amina passed her, their eyes met. Zouina blinked first. The shed was a place of legend. Its wooden walls, darkened with age and smoke, seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. It stood slightly apart from the compound, hidden by trees and a tall fence carved with snake sigils. Inside lived the sacred serpents, the same ones that appeared in dreams, guided oracles, and guarded the truth of the village. No one entered the shed unless chosen. Most feared even standing close. As the heavy door creaked open, a thick scent of musk and herbs filled the air. Amina didn't flinch. She stepped in with the grace of someone who had already surrendered to fate. Behind her, the door shut and bolted, echoing with finality. Darkness wrapped around her like a second skin. She stood still at first, letting her breathing slow, letting her ears tune in. A faint rustling surrounded her, soft, rhythmic, unthreatening. The snakes were aware. She felt them before she saw them, their warmth brushing against her ankles and wrists like curious fingers. Amina whispered a soft greeting into the dark. Her voice, clear and low, floated gently across the room. Her words weren't prayers but acknowledgments, of life, of breath, of balance. She sat cross-legged on the earth floor and closed her eyes. When she opened them moments later, the shed was no longer dark. The snakes moved in delicate patterns, their bodies shimmering in the moonlight that filtered through the thin slats in the wood. Coils glided over her lap, paused at her shoulders, then slipped away without harm. Some nestled beside her, their scaled bodies radiating an odd, steady warmth. She did not fear them. She had grown up listening to their stories. To her, they were not monsters, they were watchers. She began to hum. A tune her mother used to sing, one tied to healing in dreams. The snakes reacted. The hissing softened. A large green serpent, one known to be ancient, coiled protectively around her feet and rested its head near her knee. The night deepened. Amina's breath grew slower, as though she were falling into another world entirely. The shed, once cold and full of threat, became a womb of stillness. As her eyes closed, visions began to ripple behind her eyelids. She dreamt of water, deep rivers where serpents with gold eyes swam in endless circles. She dreamt of trees taller than clouds, their roots coiled like snakes beneath the earth. And then she saw the ancestors. They came in the shape of serpents but with faces like hers. Some old, some young. They flickered in and out of form, appearing between breaths. They whispered without mouths, and yet she understood them. Blood will betray, one said. Not all bites are venom, said another. She reached toward them in her dream, but they pulled back, not in fear but in caution. She watches you now, one warned. She plots while the world sleeps. Amina knew without needing to be told who they spoke of. Zouina. Her sister. The one she had trusted with her fears. The one whose laughter used to echo alongside hers by the river. Her heart tightened but not in anger. It tightened in mourning, for a bond slowly burned, for a love that had thinned into suspicion and smoke. Still she kept singing. Her hum rose again even in sleep, vibrating gently against the shed walls. The snakes responded. One by one they coiled around her without touching, forming a protective circle. Their movements became a dance, slow, deliberate, ancient. Outside the shed, the elders kept vigil. None of them dared peek in. Zouina sat apart, staring into the fire, her lips tight. The heat from the flames did not reach her. Her mind raced. What if the prophecy was real? What if Amina emerged unbitten? But even then, Zouina whispered to herself, there was still one bite to come. Inside the shed, Amina slowly opened her eyes as dawn approached. Her song ceased, and the snakes, as if sensing the shift in time, began to return to their nests. The warmth faded. Only the large green serpent remained near her. It blinked once, then slithered away into the shadows. Amina sat upright. She was unharmed. Not a scratch, not a single bite. Her skin was dry, her eyes clear. The shed had tested her. And she had been found sacred just as the prophecy claimed. But the words of the ancestors still lingered in her ears. Blood will betray. She didn't yet know how. But she would not ignore the warning. Not again. The stars were fading when Zowina crept from her room, silent as a shadow. Her fingers clutched the small bone-hilted dagger, its blade laced with the venom of a desert adder, a poison so precise it didn't kill with frenzy but with silence. No one saw her slip through the compound. Not even the dogs stirred. All slept deeply, tired from the prayers and offerings of the night before. But not Zowina. She had not slept at all. Each step toward the serpent shed made her breath tighter, her stomach knotted. The truth was she hadn't come just to see. She had come to make sure. Make sure that her sister was either dead or would never again rise above her. It was wrong, she knew that. But right and wrong had twisted inside her since the prophecy. Since everyone's eyes shifted from her to Amina. Since her own mother began saving the choicest food for the elder sister. Since even the elders bowed their heads slightly when Amina passed. The ground was cool beneath her bare feet as she reached the shed. The door, bolted from the outside, creaked as she opened it slowly. She paused, ears straining, heart pounding. The hissing inside was like wind through dry leaves. She stepped in. Amina lay near the center, her back against the wall, head tilted to the side. She was still breathing. Her skin glowed faintly, bathed in the milky light of pre-dawn slipping through the shed's cracks. Around her coiled dozens of snakes, python, mamba, viper, all lying quietly as if in meditation. None had bitten her. Not even a scratch. A white cobra sat near her shoulder, watching Zowina as if it had known she was coming. Zowina's chest tightened. A part of her had hoped she would be gone. That the snakes had done what fate demanded. That she wouldn't have to do this. But there Amina was, alive, untouched, her presence almost holy. Zowina's jealousy turned to panic. How could she ever live in this shadow? What future could she have in a world where Amina walked among gods? She took a slow step forward, careful not to disturb the snakes. The dagger in her hand trembled. A small brown serpent slid over her foot but did not strike. Another one wrapped lazily around her ankle before slithering away. She gasped but didn't scream. They ignored her. They didn't seem to care she was there. Amina stirred. Her eyes opened, soft and sad. She looked at Zowina and smiled faintly. "You came," she whispered. Zowina couldn't speak. The guilt, the envy, the fury, it all tangled in her throat. Her sister looked so peaceful, so impossible. "You don't have to be afraid of them," Amina said. "They see the truth." Zowina's hand tightened on the dagger. "You always talk like that. Like you know things I don't." "I only listen," Amina replied. "The world has always been speaking. You just have to listen." It was too much. Too calm. Too perfect. Zowina lunged. The dagger sank into Amina's shoulder, not deep, not fatal. Amina cried out, not in pain but in shock. Her eyes locked with Zowina's. Not anger. Not hatred. Just heartbreak. The snake stirred. All at once the silence broke. Hissing filled the room. Not rage but sadness. Like a funeral dirge echoing through the scales and sand. The white cobra slithered forward, raising its head between the sisters, but it did not strike. Instead, it hissed a long, mournful note and coiled protectively around Amina. Zowina stepped back, dagger falling from her hand. What had she done? I didn't want to. I thought, she stammered. Amina's hand pressed to the wound. Blood bloomed across her white robe. "It wasn't the venom," she whispered. "It was you." Tears streamed down Zowina's face. "You were always loved more. Chosen. Revered." "I never asked to be," Amina said. "All I wanted was to share the gift. To share everything." The snakes began to gather around Amina, their scales brushing gently against her skin, humming low and strange. Her eyes fluttered shut. Not dead. Not yet. But faint. Her spirit felt far away. Zowina turned and fled, stumbling into the night. She did not look back. Not at the snakes, not at the blood, not at the sister who had never once hated her back. The sky above began to shift, dark to blue as dawn prepared to rise. But inside that sacred shed, the silence was broken. Not by screams. Not by anger. But by the steady sound of scales against wood, and the soft, rising hum of a girl's breath, still alive, still singing even through the pain. The first rays of morning light sliced through the misty veil that always lingered near the serpent shed. Villagers gathered outside, their breath held tight in their throats. The elders stood in solemn silence, robes heavy with dew, staffs planted in the earth like ancient roots. All eyes were on the bolted door, as though the truth of an entire village's faith sat coiled behind it. When the eldest of the council stepped forward and unlatched the door with a ceremonial chant, a hush deeper than silence fell over the crowd. Inside, Amina lay crumpled near the center of the shed, her tunic darkened by blood at the shoulder. The snakes did not flee as the light poured in, they simply shifted their gaze. Some slithered back into corners, others remained coiled protectively beside her, like sentinels standing guard over a sacred relic. Amina blinked slowly, lips dry and trembling but alive. The impossible had happened, again. The villagers began murmuring, but the whispers halted the moment the oracle stepped through the crowd. She was old, wrapped in a shawl of snake skins and amulets, her eyes clouded with cataracts and yet sharper than any blade. She approached Amina, dropped to her knees with surprising grace, and touched the wound on the girl's shoulder. Her fingers brushed over the torn flesh, the bruised skin, and then lifted something from beneath the fabric, a dagger gash unmistakably clean. Not curved like a fong. Not jagged like a serpent's twin bite. This, the oracle said, standing slowly, her voice rising like thunder building in the distance, is not the bite of a snake. Gasps rang out from the villagers. One man dropped his clay pot. A child began to cry. The oracle turned to the gathered crowd and raised her hand. She was not bitten by the serpent, she said, but by her sister. The words hit like a stone hurled into still water. Zuina, who had stood near the back, cloaked in borrowed grief, took a step forward as if disbelief would shield her from judgment. Her lips moved but her voice cracked like brittle leaves. "No," she whispered. "That's not true. I only wanted to see her. I couldn't." But the shed spoke louder than she did. The snakes began to stir again, their bodies gliding across the dirt with synchronized grace. One by one they slithered toward Zuina, forming a slow, spiraling circle at her feet. No hissing. No warning. Just presence. A line drawn not in sand, but in scale. The oracle didn't move. "You carried venom, didn't you? But your heart was already full of it." Zuina's eyes widened. "No, I only wanted to be seen. I only wanted what she had." Everyone looked at her like she was made of gold and light. And me? I was a shadow behind her light. Even our parents, do you remember how they spoke your name and forgot mine? The villagers watched her spiral, caught in the web of her own confession. The elders did not interrupt. They let her truth rot in the open air. "She survived the serpents," said one elder. "And still you pierced her." "I was the sister," Zuina sobbed, "but I was never chosen. Never special. So I thought, maybe if fate wouldn't choose me, I would make it choose differently." "You did," the oracle said, her tone suddenly quiet. "But not as you wished." Then the snakes moved. Not in anger but in finality. They coiled around Zuina's ankles, not biting, not strangling, just binding. As if the serpents had decided who needed to be watched now. Zuina didn't resist. Her legs buckled. She dropped to her knees and began weeping openly, her hands trembling as she tried to wipe her tears on the hem of her robe. Amina, helped by two elders, slowly rose to her feet, blood still staining her tunic, but her posture unbroken. Her eyes, once soft, were now different. Not cold, not cruel, but ancient. As if she had heard the voices of 1,000 ancestors and was now carrying all their grief, all their wisdom, inside her slender frame. "I didn't hate you, Zuina," she said quietly. "Even when you envied me, I loved you. Even now, though your knife carved through more than flesh, I mourn the sister I thought I had." Zuina looked up, her face streaked with salt and shame. "Will they punish me?" "They already have," the oracle answered. "You will not be exiled. You will remain. Among the snakes, among the silence, and among those who remember." With a nod, the elders agreed. Zuina would tend the serpent shed for a year and a day. She would live with the creatures she once used to harm, in the space where truth had bloomed and trust had bled. As the villagers dispersed, carrying whispers with them like seeds in the wind, Amina looked toward the morning sky. A single serpent slithered up her arm, coiling around her gently, its tongue flicking near her ear as though in silent blessing. She did not flinch. The bite had not come from a beast. It had come from kin. And somehow that made it far more venomous. But even venom, when survived, could become medicine. The villagers gathered beneath the towering serpent tree, its twisted branches heavy with ancient vines and quiet watchers, sacred snakes coiled like still breaths. Amina, swaying with fatigue and wrapped in a cloth soaked from her wound, stood in the center of the circle. The trial had begun. Elders from neighboring clans sat on stones shaped like coiled vipers, their faces grim with ritual knowledge. The air vibrated with expectation as if the earth itself held its breath. Zuina was brought forward, her wrists bound in woven rope. She kept her eyes on the ground, her footsteps hesitant, echoing guilt before a single word had been spoken. All around them, the villagers formed a wide ring, whispers fluttering like dry leaves. Mothers clutched daughters. Children peeked from behind legs. Amina's bloodied shoulder gleamed in the dappled morning light, and her gaze never left her sister. Then came the first serpent. From the roots of the sacred tree, a long emerald viper emerged. It slid silently across the trial stone, tongue flicking, scales catching the sun like shards of prophecy. The elders watched its path. It circled Zuina once, twice, then stopped behind Amina, resting there motionless. A hush fell. The elder Nyaru, oldest of the seers, spoke. The serpent shows its respect to the untouched. It knows who did not strike. The next snake was darker, mud-colored, thick and slow-moving. It slithered to Zuina and brushed her foot. She gasped, but it did not bite. Instead, it curled around a small wooden staff nearby, one smeared with dried venom. The elder raised the staff with gloved hands. This, he said, was not crafted by the temple. Who forged poison in secret? No answer came. The third snake emerged, a rare silver-scaled adder known to visit only during judgment. It made its way toward Amina, paused, then turned to Zuina. Without touching her, it coiled into a spiral and raised its head. Elder Nyaru's eyes closed. The coil of shame, he murmured. The serpent mimics the shame of betrayal. The moment had come. Amina, fragile but composed, stepped forward and spoke. Her voice was low, but each word carved itself into the silence like a slow drumbeat. I loved her, she said. My sister. When they took my voice with blame, I held no hatred. When they locked me with snakes, I prayed for peace. But the wound, it came not from a serpent. It came from one I trusted. Zuina trembled. Her eyes filled, not with tears alone, but the breaking of a dam inside her. She collapsed to her knees. I did it, she whispered. I was afraid. I was angry. I saw her glowing. I thought I could change fate, but I was wrong. I thought the venom would speak for me. I thought no one would know. The villagers gasped. Some mothers turned away. Others stared, stunned by the collapse of innocence. Amina closed her eyes. She said nothing. The oracle stood then, her staff humming faintly in her hand. The prophecy, she intoned, spoke of a serpent not biting until struck by blood. And it has come true. Not one snake laid fang on Amina, until blood of kin opened the wound. She looked to the elders. Now the question is not guilt. The question is justice. The snakes began to move again, circling both sisters, forming two separate rings. One around Amina, calm and protective. The other around Zuina, tighter, flickering with agitation. An elder rose. Let the voice of the tree decide. The sacred tree above them creaked. From its highest branch, a dried skin of a serpent, the skin of a once-cursed traitor kept there by legend, fell to the ground, landing at Zuina's feet. All color drained from her face. No, she whimpered. No, please. I didn't mean. I didn't want her to die. The oracle approached slowly. Mercy, she said, is for those who do not strike bloodline. You were not just sister to Amina. You were sister to all who follow her path. You wounded more than flesh. You struck the symbol of voice, of peace, of prophecy. The village awaited her judgment. The oracle turned to the tree and pressed her palm to the bark. Let her bear the snakes, not as companions but as memory. Her voice echoed like wind between cliffs. Zuina shall live, banished from speech. For 7 years she may not utter word nor cry. Only the hiss of serpents shall answer her thoughts. She will be marked, not with chains but with silence. Zuina wept then. But no one reached to comfort her. The snakes uncoiled and began to slither away. Amina collapsed, her strength spent, but her dignity intact. Villagers rushed to her aid. The oracle laid a hand upon her forehead. You will heal, she said. And one day you will speak of this trial, not as pain but as history. As Zuina was led away, her mouth already sealed by an herb binding, her eyes locked with Amina's. A flicker of regret passed between them, a thread frayed but not fully broken. Above, the snake tree swayed. The trial was over, but its story had just begun. The villagers stood frozen as the oracle's voice faded into the rustle of leaves. The trial had ended, but the air remained thick with unshed tears, shock, and something deeper, an ancient sorrow awakening. The snake tree shimmered under the early morning light, and its roots seemed to pulse with memory, remembering every betrayal ever whispered beneath its branches. Zowina knelt at its base, her face streaked with ash and guilt. She had confessed. Her voice had broken like dried reeds in a storm, and her hands trembled from the weight of her own actions. The elders circled her slowly, robes brushing the earth, their eyes narrowed not in fury, but in grave judgment. One of them stepped forward, a withered man whose beard flowed like smoke. His voice trembled with age but not uncertainty. "Zowina," he said, "you have shed blood of the bloodline. You have broken the bond that ties soul to soul, sister to sister." Zowina didn't respond. Her mouth was parched, her lips cracked, but inside, her shame burned hotter than the morning sun. Amina stood behind her, leaning against one of the tree's thick roots, her arms still bound in cloth soaked with blood. Her face was pale, but she had refused to rest, insisting on witnessing her sister's fate, not out of vengeance but a sense of mourning. "There will be no death," the oracle finally spoke, stepping into the circle. "For the dead forget. But the living remember." The crowd murmured. Some nodded, others looked confused. "No death? For such a crime?" The oracle raised her hand, silencing the noise. "Let her tongue bear the truth she tried to kill. Let her mouth carry the weight of her betrayal. She shall speak only truth. And when she lies, even in jest, may the serpents burn her from within." A hush fell. Two priestesses stepped forward, carrying a bowl of glowing ink, serpent ink harvested from the scales of the oldest cobra in the land. It shimmered green and gold as if it breathed. They tilted Zowina's head back, and though she struggled, she did not resist. Her mouth opened in a silent scream as the ink touched her tongue. Smoke rose. Her eyes rolled. The pain was not just physical, it was ancestral. Her ancestors turned from her in spirit, and she felt it like a door closing in her soul. Amina looked away, tears carving quiet rivers down her cheeks. The pain on Zowina's face was almost too much to bear. Despite everything, despite the wound, despite the betrayal, she still loved her sister. That was the tragedy. That was always the tragedy. Zowina collapsed, shaking. Her tongue glowed faintly now, a symbol burned into it, a serpent curled around a single drop of blood. The punishment was complete. The elders turned to the crowd. "Let this be a tale remembered. That not all bites come from fangs. That the sharpest venom may come from the heart of kin." The villagers bowed in silence, none daring to speak. Amina was carried away by the priestesses to be tended. Zowina was left beneath the tree for the rest of the day, the bark above her whispering in the wind, the snakes watching her from coiled places. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. Zowina tried to speak again, first small things. But when she tried to deny she'd taken extra fruit at the market, her tongue blistered instantly. When she claimed she'd forgotten something she hadn't, the burn came so sharp she bled from her mouth. She began to speak less and less. People around her grew uneasy, not out of hatred but discomfort. Truths always floated around her. Secrets died in her presence. Children were warned not to lie near her. Even mothers who once adored her charm, now stepped aside when she entered a space. She became known as the girl with the burning tongue. And Amina, she healed slowly. But the light in her eyes had changed. She no longer sang for snakes in the morning, no longer played her flute by the river. Instead, she walked with a gentler kind of strength. She visited Zowina once. Just once. She brought food and Zowina refused it. "I don't deserve it," she mumbled. "You do," Amina whispered. "Not because of what you did, but because I still remember the girl who held my hand when we were small. The girl who caught frogs with me. The girl who cried when I was sick." Zowina wept that day, her tears silent, her voice gone. Years passed. Amina became a woman of wisdom. She no longer needed snakes to speak for her. People came to her with their questions, their hurts, their broken stories. She listened. She guided. She was no longer just the unbitten girl from prophecy. She was Amina, the woman who survived a sister's venom and chose not to return it. Zowina became a ghost in her own village. Not exiled, but exiled in spirit. She lived in a small hut near the edge of the sacred forest. Children dared each other to speak to her. Some nights she would walk to the serpent shed, sit outside it and just stare. The snakes never came near her again. But once, on the night of the red moon, Amina walked into the forest alone and found Zowina standing under the snake tree. She didn't speak. Neither did Amina. They stood in silence for a long time. Zouina finally said, "I still dream of that night. And I dream of the days before it," Amina replied. "I would undo it if I could." "I know." Zouina touched her lips. "It still burns. It always will." The two sisters did not hug. They did not cry. But something passed between them, something that had been broken and was now, if not whole, at least no longer bleeding. When Amina left that night, the villagers saw her differently the next morning. Not as a woman of only light, but a woman who had stood in darkness and not been consumed. Zouina faded further into silence. But she never lied again. She could not. And so the villagers slowly began to ask her questions, because sometimes truth, even if painful, is better than silence. And so her punishment became her path. And Amina's mercy became her legend. To this day, mothers in that village whisper to their children before bed, "Do not bite the ones who hold your blood. For even the sharpest fangs may break on love." And some say on certain nights the snake shed still hums softly, not with anger or vengeance, but with the lingering echoes of two sisters. One who was bitten by blood. And one who forgave. Amina's body healed slowly, but her silence remained. The villagers watched her from a respectful distance, uncertain whether to bow or pray when she walked by. Her wound, though bandaged and clean, throbbed in rhythm with the memory of her sister's betrayal. Yet she spoke not a word against Zouina. She simply walked, pale but proud, through the village pathways and toward the shed no one dared approach. The snake shed had become a place of reverence. After the trial it was clean but never disturbed. Amina began to visit it each evening, just as the sun dipped low and the shadows lengthened. She carried no staff, no weapon. Only a shallow bowl of milk and a few soft herbs for the serpents. She would sit among them as if among old friends. Coils brushed against her arms and legs. Their tongues flicked out to taste the scent of her skin. She never flinched. In her stillness the snakes began to speak. Not with human voices but in pulses, patterns and vibrations. She closed her eyes, and they coiled around her gently, offering their secrets as if placing them in her lap. Amina learned to understand them, not as beasts but as carriers of time and memory. They told her stories not found in any scroll, not passed down by any elder. They spoke of floods before men had homes, of songs sung by stars, and of the first child who dared to name fire. Each whisper slithered into her soul, and with each visit her grief softened into something sacred. Soon the villagers noticed a change in her presence. When she walked through the village, birds quieted. Children stopped crying. The wind itself seemed to hush. She did not preach or call gatherings. Instead, she sat beneath the tree near the shed, closed her eyes and waited. One by one people came, not to ask questions but to sit with her in silence. They called her the unbitten. Mothers brought their weeping children, and Amina would place a hand on their backs, humming softly. Men with quarrels sat nearby and after an hour of shared silence, found their rage softened. Even animals wandered closer to her without fear. The village changed, not through grand miracles but through the quiet power of presence. She began to speak again but only in fragments. Riddles wrapped in warmth. Questions instead of answers. "What sings louder, the river or the rock that shapes it?" she would ask a worried father. Or to a girl unsure of her future, "Does the butterfly know it was once a thing that crawled?" Children adored her. They would gather around her at dusk, not to play but to listen. Amina never raised her voice. Instead she tapped the ground and the snakes would emerge, soft, slow and safe. The children learned to sit still, to breathe in rhythm with the earth. Amina taught them the language of soundless things. The way a snake's movement could be read like a sentence, the way a tree could hum grief through its bark. And yet, even in this peace, Amina bore the weight of her wound, not on her skin but in her heart. She never named Zouina in her stories. Never spoke of the night of the blade. Her silence was not denial, it was transformation. She had taken the venom of betrayal and woven it into wisdom. The elders watched in awe, their authority quietly eclipsed by the girl who had walked among serpents and returned unbitten, save for one wound that had taught her more than any scroll or chant ever could. They offered her titles, seats in the council, privileges. She declined them all. Her place was not in halls or ceremonies, but among the whispering scales and the soft-spoken leaves. One night, a traveling scribe came through the village and stayed near the shed, curious about the tales he had heard. He tried to question Amina, pen in hand, asking for her teachings. She merely smiled and said, "Ink cannot trap what lives in silence." The next morning, the scribe left with no notes but with tears in his eyes. And so, the unbitten became more than a survivor. She became a mirror, one that reflected each soul's question back to them, not with answers but with space to feel. The snakes, once feared, were now seen as guardians of old truths. And the shed, once cursed, had become the village's most sacred temple, not because of the creatures within, but because of the girl who chose to listen.